This is Join Us in France, episode 12. Hello, I'm Annie.
And I'm Elyse.
And we welcome you to the Join Us in France travel podcast. Elyse is a professional tour guide, art historian, and a really good storyteller.
Yes.
And we are here to help you prepare your trip to France. On today's show, we celebrate the 125th anniversary of the Eiffel Tower, which took place on March 31st, 2014. And Elyse tells us how the tower came to be, how the people of Paris liked it, and some practical things to consider before you visit. If you're driving and can't take notes, don't worry about it. You'll find our show notes on joinusinfrance.com/12. But before we get going today, I would like to say thank you to Jeff Steiner of AmericansInFrance.net for interviewing me about Join Us in France a couple of weeks ago. It was very fun to talk to him. He has some really good resources for Americans who live in France, so I encourage you to check him out, AmericansInFrance.net. And now, a little music to get us in the mood, and then we'll get right into it.
Hi, Annie. How are you doing today?
I am fine. How are you, Elyse?
Oh, I'm fine, and I'm so excited to be talking about that strange thing called the Eiffel Tower.
Yes. But before we get to that, this is our 12th show. Our listenership has been growing steadily, and it's really, really encouraging to us. Thank you out there for listening to us. Now, we're on iTunes and Stitcher Radio, and that's great. But, there's always a but, isn't there? Both iTunes and Stitcher have this bad habit of relying very heavily on reviews to decide how good of a show is and how much visibility they're going to give it, which kind of makes sense, I guess. So for now, we're a little bit hard to find because even people who are looking for information on visiting France, they can't really find us easily. They have to know the name of the show to find us.
Join Us in France.
That's right, Join Us in France. But I mean, who says, "Oh, I want to hear about the Eiffel Tower. I think I'm gonna go to iTunes and type Join Us in France." Like, it's a cute name, but it's not very descriptive. I think in the long term it'll serve us well. But anyway, there's a way to fix all that, and this way is for our listeners to go and write us a review, you see. If they do that, if they can see that we're getting reviews, they bring us from the back of the store where it's dark and damp and nobody can find us to the front, and they put the lights on and they make it look gorgeous, and then, it's going to be fabulous because people just browsing for France or for travel, it'll suggest it to them. So we would love it if you would do that. There are several people who've already done that, and let me thank them. Sandra Goodwin says, we're a great armchair tour. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, Sandra.
Yes, I hope you come visit for real, too. I mean, armchair is good, but for real is better. Geneva JG, who says she couldn't recommend these podcasts more highly. Thank you, Geneva. Then we have Little Jack Slade 2, who says we're an absolute must for art history and architecture aficionados.
Yay.
Yes, thank you, Little Jack Slade 2. And KRS Chicago says merci. Oh, nice. For this informative and entertaining podcast. Thank you, KRS. We'd love to mention you as well on an upcoming show. So make us very happy and give us more visibility by writing us a review in iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. On Stitcher, I think all you do is like a thumbs up kind of thing. But I live in France, so I don't use Stitcher very much. So okay, so was that enough promotion for one day, Elyse?
Yeah, I think it is. I feel like I've just had to deal with a traveling salesman who knocks on my door, It's like,
sorry, I have to do it.
I know.
It's either that or spend $1 million on advertising.
Yeah, I know. It's really good. It's really good to hear the reviews, though.
Yeah.
It really is.
Okay, so the Eiffel Tower.
Okay, so let's talk about the Eiffel Tower. And I'm sure if I ask you the same question we would ask anybody else, which is, what is the one monument that you think of if you hear the word Paris?
Oh, definitely the Eiffel Tower.
Definitely the Eiffel Tower. And I would guess that actually it's the same even if you just say France. Although some people might say castles or,
True.
chateaus or something like that.
Yeah.
But we really know that the icon that represents Paris and really France in the outside world is the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
What I'd like to do is give a little bit of background information about it because the actual background history is fascinating. It really is. So it's called the Eiffel Tower because the man whose company built it was Mr. Gustav Eiffel.
Yes.
Who, in spite of his name, which sounds very Alsatian, was actually born in Dijon, which is in Burgundy. It was actually his grandparents' name, and he used it for professional reasons. And he was born in 1832 and didn't die until 1923. He was 91 when he died.
Wow, that's nice.
Yeah, and what the story is fascinating. There are two things. One is very important because it has a lot to do with a lot of the architecture and design that was done starting in the end of the 19th century in Paris and then in Europe. That was the creation of a new material called cast iron. You know, up until that time, iron was hammered out.
Oh, okay.
It was actually, you know, all the beautiful grill work you see everywhere. If it's really older than the beginning of the 1800s, it means it was all done by hand. It was a forger-own, you know, who was standing there like in the movies and hearing the songs, you know.
One of my grandfathers, that was
really?
his job, yeah.
And then the cast iron, I don't know exactly how, was created. It was invented in the north of France because that's where all of the steel and iron mines were in the iron industry. And of course, what that means is that it was molten and poured into molds. And so things could be made on a larger scale and
In any shape.
and
Right.
they could make enormous numbers of things. And so a lot of new architecture and new buildings began in Paris and in Belgium with this new material. And some of the very beautiful things, which unfortunately were then taken down later on, were made of cast iron and glass. And one day soon we'll talk about the two of these other buildings that are not very far from the Eiffel Tower that are still standing in Paris, that are still there, made of cast iron and glass. But for the moment, let's talk about the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
So Mr. Eiffel, he had a construction business. He was actually a structural engineer, and he had a company, and he did very well. Starting immediately after his studies, he was basically known, believe it or not, as a designer of bridges.
Ah.
And of course, bridges are metallic structures, especially at the end of the 19th century. And so there was an idea to create a structure of some kind. Nobody really knew exactly what the form would be for the entranceway into the World's Fair of 1889. Now, this is the other thing that's really fascinating. I can remember as a child, and here I go dating myself, in New York City when I was really little, my folks took me to a World's Fair. And the only thing, unfortunately, I remember is eating a waffle with whipped cream. I don't remember too much else. But I do remember that there were lots of buildings that represented different countries, except that was the one thing that stuck in my mind. I guess I'd never had one before. But in the 19th century, taking something that actually had come up through the Middle Ages, the idea of fairs, which was extremely interesting. It's a whole story, but we won't talk about those. But in the 19th century, with the Industrial Revolution, they decided, the different countries in Europe decided it would really be good and kind of cool to show all of the recent developments, industrial, technological developments. And Paris, which was the leading city in Europe, decided that it would host several of these World's Fairs, and having already done a couple, was the host city for the World's Fair of 1889.
Okay.
So this means, of course, as most people I think know, that every country creates a pavilion, and they usually ask for their latest design and very interesting architecture and things like that. So the city put out a bid for a structure that would be the entranceway into the World's Fair. And the World's Fair was going to be built on the border of the Seine River. And so they gave an allotted space, actually on the other side of the river, that would be a kind of magnificent entranceway in. And Eiffel had some architects and designers working for him, and they came up with the idea of using this new material and creating basically what would be almost like a a Lego kind of structure. I mean, nobody had ever done anything like that before. Most people, of course, we'll talk about that in a minute. They said they were out of their minds anyway. But they said, why don't we try something new? And so they put together some sketches and they talked to Mr. Eiffel. And the idea was to create this tower. It's a very strange form, as some people I think already know, because it's very wide on the bottom and it narrows as it goes up to the top. So it wasn't like a typical old tower anyway.
Yeah.
And it wasn't closed. It wasn't a full building. But it was meant to be an entranceway. And so
sorry to interrupt you, but you can really see that. Google has this Cultural Institute, and the Google Cultural Institute did a whole research project on the Eiffel Tower. And if you go to Google that Eiffel Tower, Google Institute, you will find the most stunning old pictures where you can totally see the entranceway, how it was built,
right.
the different steps. I mean, it's it's a really interesting.
It's not only interesting, but to know that because by the 1880s photography was very popular, it's totally documented. You can actually see the entire development of how it's built stage by stage.
Yeah,
and Eiffel was a very meticulous man. So everything is kept. And in fact, that will bring us up to something I want to talk about at the end, about something that's going to open up very soon at the Eiffel Tower. But this is what is really interesting, is that Eiffel is not the man who designed it. He was the man whose company built it. But he had very, very good connections. So the story is that even though it was what I guess we call an open bid for different designs, it was pretty much decided ahead of time that his design, this strange tower design, would be the one accepted.
Yeah, well, it works that way.
We're not talking necessarily even about, money or anything like that. It's just that he was very, very good friends with one of the city commissioners who liked his work. And there was a little bit, there was some talk at the time about not necessarily that he was giving money to be chosen, but why was this design chosen? After all, they hadn't really taken a good look at other things. But his design was indeed chosen. They began working on the construction in 1887.
Okay.
And it took 2 years, and of course
that's pretty quick. It's a big structure.
It's a big structure. But think about this, even though of course it's 50 years later, 41 years later, in 1930 the Empire State Building was begun, and it took exactly 1 year.
Oh, wow.
1 year. So when you think about the advances in technology through the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, they really are remarkable. Of course, what we have in front of us with the Eiffel Tower, though, is just nuts and bolts. Just cast iron and bolts, and that is all. Now, one of the things, and I know we're going to have pictures set up on the podcast site, if you look at the Eiffel Tower, you see these beautiful rounded arches down at the bottom at the base, which is, of course, a rectangular or square. I think it's actually totally square base with these beautiful arches in between the feet, the curved out feet. Those arches were originally not in the design.
No.
They were added in.
That's true. Yeah, I saw that.
Right?
Yeah.
They were added in on the insistence of people in the city because they were certain that it would not be stable enough. And they were worried that, of course, number one, it would fall over, especially with the winds. And number two, it would just collapse because nobody had ever built anything quite so high before.
Oh, and it's massive. I mean, when
it's
you're
absolutely
there,
massive.
It's nothing like you've ever seen. It's a really stunning. Just being there, you feel really, really, really small.
You feel small, right?
Yeah.
So, in fact, what happened was he reluctantly added in those curved pieces. And interestingly enough, now, of course, I'm the artist and art historian, designer. I love those curves because they add an elegance to something that is actually a bit severe. Okay, so what they do is they soften it a little bit.
Yeah, because when you look at the pictures on the birth of the Eiffel Tower, they do show a picture with a squarish look,
right?
And it's not as nice.
No, it's really not as nice. And so, interestingly enough, something that was insisted on for security reasons, turns out to have added to the aesthetic. But this is what I love as part of the story. The tower was finished on time, as you mentioned earlier, for the World's Fair to open on the 31st of March, 1889. But as it was going up, there was a huge, huge uproar in the intellectual artistic community of Paris and probably elsewhere when people saw the designs which were published in the newspaper and saw it being built. They signed a petition called the Petition of the 300. And many of the people who signed this petition were famous artists and writers and politicians. And part of what they said, I've read the entire petition, but I've just taken a little bit and tried to translate it into English because it's really incredible considering how much we now love the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
And also it's a lesson in history about what happens and how long it takes for things to be completely accepted.
Yeah.
So just this little bit of a sentence. Now, they're talking about what will happen in relation to all the beautiful buildings that are medieval and then, of course, 18th and 19th century that has redone Paris, because Paris was redone in this gorgeous, beautiful style of architecture.
Yeah.
And so they say that putting up this tower was going to be a blot of ink on the landscape of Paris. The hateful shadow of the hateful column of bolted, sheeted metal that was the tower was going to contaminate the rest of Paris. Now, this with exclamation points. I mean, you just, I don't know if they put 300 on for each one who signed, but it was kind of like that. And
they were very
interestingly
worried.
enough, it's a good thing that, ironically, that the city council was quite sure of itself as a council, and Eiffel himself was not someone who was very modest. So he was very, very sure that whatever he was doing was going to go down in history. Ironically, of course, it is true. It has gone down in history.
Yeah.
And everything else he designed has not, except for one thing. This is the aside that I know is always astounding. He and his company are the ones that built the Statue of Liberty.
Wow.
Now, he didn't design it. It was an artist named Bartholdi.
Yes. But
He
they
actually
did
the construction of it.
Wow.
Because it's made out of cast iron.
Yeah.
But
and
otherwise,
I've never seen the Statue of Liberty, but I'm going to visit it this summer, and I'm really excited because I've seen it from a distance many, many times, but I haven't,
it's
been
fabulous.
on it. So
it's really, it's impressive,
Yeah.
especially now you can go up to the top again,
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so this is what happened. So, of course, there was this huge uproar, but when the World's Fair opened, it became the most incredible attraction because it was built so that people could go up to the top. And the other thing is that when it was built, there was a contract signed saying that it was going to be torn down after 20 years because there was going to be another World's Fair in 20 years in 1909, which in fact there was. And all of these buildings that all these different countries put up were basically meant to be temporary. And so it was going to be torn down. Now, in the interim, in the 20 years, thousands and thousands of people started going to see it. And among the other innovations was the fact that they designed special elevators, because obviously this is very high up and it's hard to get to the top.
Yeah.
And they designed special elevators, and guess who designed them? It was the Otis Company.
Oh, wow.
Now, that was the other thing. Protectionism existed even back then. And the city of Paris, people were also in an uproar because they wanted it to be a French company. And French have very good design and engineers. But nobody could figure out how to put in the system of elevators that would work with this curve that's on the bottom and go all the way up, because they had to put in 3 different elevators that would take people all the way up to the top. And eventually, to get around it, Otis opened its branch in France. So Otis France became the builder of the elevators.
Yes, and they're still here.
And they're still here.
Yeah,
They are still
who works
here.
for them.
Now, why is the Eiffel Tower still there? It should have been torn down in 1909. Well, 2 things happened. In the beginning of the 20th century, we have the development of wireless, which led, of course, to the development of radio. And the first telegraph wireless antenna were put up on the top of the Eiffel Tower. And it was decided that this was a very good place because it was indeed the highest spot, the highest, tallest structure in all of Paris. And what happened was, by the beginning of World War I in 1914, it was considered to be extremely valuable. And in fact, here's a wonderful story. The French jammed the radio antennae so that the Germans would not be able to use it to hear or transmit any kind of signals because of World War I. Now, of course, we're talking about World War I when the Germans were not in Paris. They were on the border, the frontier between Belgium, France, and Germany.
Yeah.
But what happened was it became an important place because it was the place where radio was sent out from. Now, just to back up for a second, because I remember that I was going to tell you that the people that were there at the opening, very important, this is a big deal. I mean, this is the tallest structure in the world. Tallest man-made structure in the world
at that point
in 1889.
Right.
So this is a big deal, right? So of course, lots of princes and Prince of Wales, who eventually became king, Sarah Bernhardt, the famous French actress, and two very, very famous Americans, Thomas Edison, who of course was one of the people responsible for setting up the radio system, and who of course invented telegraph and radio himself, and this one's really a gas. Buffalo Bill Cody. What was he doing on the top of the Eiffel Tower?
Well,
he was a showman.
Known, and he was a showman. He was
a showman.
Known,
and he had his traveling show in Paris at the time. So with his long hair, big mustache, and cowboy hat, he was one of the first people to go to the top of the Eiffel Tower. Isn't that amazing?
That's great.
Would be wonderful to have a picture of that, So what happened was, really, quite honestly, is that it became, strangely enough, an instant success in the sense that people wanted to go to it. And, of course, you have two ways of going up to the top. You either take the elevators or you can walk. Now, there are 3 levels. There are 3 horizontal levels. The first level is 300 steps up from the ground, and a lot of people do go up to the first level.
Yeah.
The second level is another 300 steps up.
Yeah.
And then you have over 1,100 steps to the very top, to the observation deck.
Oh, wow.
Now, most people obviously take the elevator. It's really, really, really arduous, and you have to have a very strong heart to go to the top.
Yes. So when we discussed this before, I told you that I had walked all the way to the top.
Right.
And then I talked about it with my cousin.
Yeah.
And she says, "No, you're
didn't.
remembering wrong. We just walked to the second level."
I was going to say, that sounds more plausible to me, really, even if you were just a kid.
I was 9 years old, and it felt like
it walked to the top. Yeah. No, notice how you remember it all these years later. So it must have been quite impressive.
I do. And well, she was an adult, so she says, "Oh yeah, I remember it very well. Nobody would walk up with me except for you." So
there you are. But
she's
you did make it to the second level. That's pretty good, anyway. So Second World War again. What happened to the Eiffel Tower? Because now, of course, unfortunately, we have the Germans who are occupying Paris and France. And this time, this is interesting because I like all of these examples of what we could call passive resistance, right? The cables to all the elevators were cut. And they were destroyed in such a way that the Germans never had either the wherewithal or the time to try to fix them. So they could not use the tower. They could not use it for radio signals. And at the end of the war, when they were about to evacuate, knowing that they did certain things that were a bit, what we can call spiteful, if nothing more than that.
Yeah.
They wanted to get to the top and leave a flag to show that they had actually been there. And apparently they chose several of the most fit of the young officers, I suppose, and they did make it up by foot to the very top, and they planted the Nazi flag, which within 3 or 4 minutes was blown away by the wind.
Perfect.
So there you are.
I like it.
Yeah, isn't that a great story?
Yeah.
So there it is. It is the most visited paid monument in the world.
Oh, wow.
In the year
There are certainly a lot of people.
There are a lot of people. And think about how many monuments and things are visited. So you have the Vatican, you have the Louvre. I mean, there are lots of things, but the Eiffel Tower beats them all, really beats them all. In the year 2010, I don't know who the person was. I hope they gave that person more than just a free ticket. There was the 250 millionth person who went up to the top. I hope all the lights went on and sirens rang and things like that. I mean, could you imagine? Just by pure chance, you're that person. You know?
That's great.
Maybe they got a free meal in the wonderful restaurant there. Okay, let's talk about what's inside the tower. There are, as I mentioned, 3 levels. Mm-hmm. On the first level, which is the level that very few people actually stop at now, and I'll explain in a minute, there's some changes that are going to happen soon. It's where you change for another elevator, and there is just this kind of little souvenir shop. And then if you go to the second level, you have another shop, and you have this very fancy restaurant called the Jules Verne restaurant, which is run by the famous chef Alain Ducasse, who has now got a restaurant empire anyway.
Yeah.
And it's apparently a fabulously wonderful restaurant.
Okay.
However, it's €100 for lunch.
It's a bit expensive.
Which is about $135 for lunch. So you have to know that, and it's a restaurant that you have to have a reservation at least 3 months in advance.
Oh, well, yeah.
Okay? Most of the time. So I know of a couple of people who came to Paris and were given as a present by somebody in their family a lunch at the Jules Verne restaurant. I thought that was really nice.
Yeah,
I would
that's
like
very nice.
somebody to give me that as a present.
But
Love
you're not
it.
begging or anything.
Oh, I'm not begging or anything. And of course, one of the things besides the fact that the food is supposed to be exquisite is that you have this fabulous view.
Yeah, the view is very nice.
The view is unbelievable.
Yeah.
So there are things that are going to happen to the Eiffel Tower. They are in the process of renovating the elevators. And I was wondering why the last time I took a group there, which was a few months ago, there were still very long lines because only one elevator side is open. Because normally there are elevators on 2 sides, east side and west side.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, it's usually managed fairly well so that you don't have to wait too long.
Yeah.
But it's because, in fact, on one side they're in the process, and it's taken longer than expected, to do a complete renovation of the elevator system because it really is getting to be archaic. Mm-hmm. And they're setting in a second system of elevators that they think will hopefully be more efficient. So people should be, if they go soon, a little bit patient and know that there are obviously certain times of the day and certain months of the year when you will have to stand online. Now, even buying the ticket ahead of time doesn't change anything. See, so you can buy a ticket ahead of time, but it doesn't mean you get into the Eiffel Tower any
you still have
sooner.
to line up.
You still have to stand online.
Yeah.
Right. Now, the other thing is, strangely enough,
but that, I mean, if you don't get the ticket in advance, then
you stand on the ticket line.
You have to do 2 lines.
Right.
So if you want to avoid the ticket line, get your tickets in advance. You know?
Exactly.
That's what we did, and I think it worked out really well.
But you probably went before they were doing this work. And it is true that when they had the 2 sides opened with the elevators, it really went much more quickly. The fact is you can't really designate a specific time because there's such a long line that you really don't know when you're able to get in. I think you can designate a day. I'm not even sure anymore.
I don't remember. It was a while ago. I don't remember.
But the other thing is, and this is very interesting, is that because after 2010, there was a slight drop-off in the number of people visiting. The reason that the city became worried was not so much that, was that the Eiffel Tower brings in money.
Of course.
It brings in a lot of money. And what they did a study and realized that people were buying the ticket to go up to the observatory, which is, of course, all the way up on top, which is at 81, the equivalent of 81 floors up. And it's, of course, encircled with glass. Yeah. And the warning to those who want to go up, if you have vertigo, really be careful because the elevators are enclosed in glass, and if you look out, it feels like you are just moving up with nothing in front of you. Yeah. So you have to really, I did this with my mom. This is already going back about 15 years. And I didn't realize that she was somebody who didn't like heights. And she started squeaking like a mouse in the middle of the elevator. And, the elevators, there's several of them. And I thought, uh-oh. So I had her turn around and look at the bolts and the columns in the center because it is very fast. I mean, from the 3rd from the second level up to the top. It doesn't take that long. So, and once we were up on top, it's fine because, you have enough space to walk around.
How big is it up there, that space? I don't remember. Last time I didn't go up because I am afraid of heights.
You are afraid of heights?
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't remember. But when you get out of the elevator, there's a central little section that is inside.
Okay.
And then you have what basically is a donut kind of corridor that goes around. And it's certainly... I don't know. I would say 4 meters wide or something like that. I mean, it's enough for lots of people to be up there at the same time. You have the machines that, you can put a coin in so that you can see really far away.
Yeah.
But of course, what do people mostly do up there is, besides just standing there going, they take photos. So one of the new things that's going to happen, and this is not until next, I think it said in the article I read 2015. So this is for you, Annie. We'll get you to go up there because there's going to be a champagne stand. So you can buy a cup, a coupe of champagne and have people take a photo of you with your glass of champagne looking out over the rooftops of Paris at the top of the Eiffel Tower.
How terribly crass and yet wonderful.
Isn't that wonderful? I figured you'd like that, Really, it'll get you up there,
One question I have is when you're up there, is it all surrounded by
It's all surrounded completely.
So if you take photos, it's through the plexiglass.
It's through the plexiglass,
Okay.
and that is it. I mean, let's face it, you don't want to fool around with something like this. It's totally secure. There is no problem. You don't have to worry about children climbing anything.
Or
they
people
do
throwing
clean
stuff
it.
down.
Now, this is interesting. The staff that works on the Eiffel Tower, I saw a wonderful documentary about it not very long ago. They show up at something like 5 a.m. because the tower opens actually at 9:30. And their job is to get all of the stock ready for the different stores and the restaurants and things like that. And everything that's in the restaurant, even the fancy restaurant, is brought up by the same elevators little by little because there's no place to store anything in the Eiffel Tower. And then they do everything. They clean the plexiglass, get all the fingerprints off. So because they know that the reason people go up to the top is to take photos.
Yeah.
But they look, but it's also to take photos.
Yeah.
So they want to make sure that people
That
don't
good.
feel unhappy when they get up to the top.
Yeah.
So this is the other thing they're going to do, and I'm not sure about this one. On the first level, which is the level that most people seem to have ignored because they get off, they go to the other elevator, and that's the end of that.
Yeah, there's nothing much there.
They're going to put in a museum of the history of the building of the Eiffel Tower.
Well, see, that sounds like a great idea.
With lots of photographs and documentation.
Uh-huh.
They're going to have a nicer store, not just, you kitschy little, Eiffel Tower
Keychains.
Keychains and, little thingies or snowballs or whatever.
Yeah.
Which I have one of those, by the way.
I have one of those too. I have a lamp in the shape of
I
the
have
Eiffel
a
Tower.
keychain. I mean, I'm a sucker. What do you want? I even have a magnet for my refrigerator. But one of the other things they're going to do is they're going to have a cafeteria.
Uh-huh.
And they're going to make the center of the floor made out of very thick plexiglass. So it's going to be transparent. So
Under your feet?
Under your feet.
Ooh, I'm not happy about that.
So what's going to happen is that when you stand in the middle, if there's a central host area, right? Because then, of course, you have the cafeteria, you have the museum, you have the store and everything. But if you stand there and look down, you see the ground, which is, of course,
far away.
It's far away. I mean, it's not as far away as if you're up on top. But they're hoping that will amuse people.
Yeah.
And that they will take some photographs. But mostly what they're trying to do is get people to stop at that level with the museum and with the cafeteria and the store that will have better items to bring in more revenue because the Eiffel Tower is basically self-sufficient in terms of its revenue. And it requires enormous amounts of upkeep.
Of course it does.
It's painted every other year.
Yeah.
Every other year.
Just that.
This is cast iron, so
Can
it
you
has
imagine
to be painted,
having
right?
to paint the Eiffel Tower?
Paint the Eiffel Tower.
I painted my gate, my iron gate, and I complained
You
the whole
complained,
time.
right? Now, what about the Eiffel Tower, visiting it? Well, in the heart of the high season, you can go there from 9 in the morning
Until?
to 1:45 at night.
Oh, so it's a late visit. You can do a late visit.
You
It's
can do a
beautiful at
night visit. Now, the night visit, of course, the best way of seeing the Eiffel Tower at night is not from up on top, but from somewhere else, like on a boat on the river.
Yeah.
You can walk along
On
the
the Bateau
Seine,
Mouche, it's
but the Bateau Mouche all go up and around and make a U right in front of the Eiffel Tower, and
Yeah.
they stop there for a minute. So at night, it's all lit up, and you see this incredible structure that is absolutely gorgeous. It really is truly beautiful. And 5 minutes at every hour, on the hour, for 5 minutes, it sparkles with
Yeah.
lights. And
Yeah.
literally, it is just phenomenal.
It's beautiful.
It's just
the
beautiful.
sparkling is like, whoa.
Oh, it's wow. It really is.
Yeah.
And of course, the 14th of July for what we call Bastille Day, which the French have no idea what that means, by the way. You know, the French don't call it Bastille Day. They call it the anniversary of the French Revolution.
We call it le 14 juillet.
The 14 juillet, right?
Yeah.
That's what you call it.
Yeah,
right?
it's the
That's what
14th
you
of
guys
July.
call it. You know?
Yeah.
Once I had my nephew, who's a doll. He wrote me a message. He said, I was here. You know, he says, "Hi, happy Bastille Day." I said, "Oh, that's so sweet." And I told that to not you, another French friend, and she said, "What's Bastille Day?" And I'm going, "Okay, you know." It's like I get a message from an American saying Happy Halloween, and I say to a French, and they go, "What's Halloween?" You know.
Yeah,
So
which we do.
we do have a little bit of a difference there. But anyway, the tower is absolutely magnificent.
Yeah.
And at night, it lights up. And for different holidays, it changes color.
Yes, it does.
So the 14th of July is red, white, and blue.
Of course.
Of course.
Of course.
Christmas is green and red. And at different events.
I've seen it in blue with the stars of the EU on
That's
it.
right.
It looks beautiful like
And
that.
when France, this is now going back, unfortunately, too far as the French are concerned, when France won the World Cup,
Yes.
it was blue because the color of the team
The
is
team.
blue.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool, actually.
That was soccer World
That was
Cup,
pretty
by the
good,
way.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's really gorgeous. So summer hours are from 9 to 1:45 at night. Winter hours, which starts actually in September, but that's okay. It's from 9:30 till 11:45 at night. So still
It's still pretty late.
pretty late. You still have time to get up there. You have time to see it from before, underneath, or on the river, or across the river. Or you can go up on top and be part of the sparkle yourself.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good thing to know, because one of the problems I think with France is that things close. A lot of the museums close not so late. So if especially if you're jet lagged coming
Right.
from North America, you're going to be wanting to sleep in till 2.
That's true.
And then the rest of the day, well, if things close at 7 p.m., what do you do the rest of the
What do
day?
you do?
So it would be a good thing
It's a
to
wonderful
do.
thing to do. I mean, that, and of course, the Bateau Mouche, but we'll talk about
Yeah,
that. Do you know? Oh, I shouldn't talk about that now. It's another subject. You get me started, and I can't stop.
It's okay. Say
It's
it.
okay. But why are the Bateau Mouche called Bateau Mouche? Do you know why?
I have no idea.
Okay, does everybody out there know what a bateau mouche is? A bateau mouche is one of the wonderful boats that's basically a flat bottom boat that goes up and down the Seine as a tourist boat.
Yeah.
And takes you basically on about an hour and 20-minute ride. And
Yeah.
you see all the major monuments with lights focusing on them. And you have a guide who is comprehensible or not, speaking in English and about 5 other languages. And it's great. It's just one of those things. I've done it so
Yeah.
many times. I take all
It's
my
fun.
people with me. I mean, I go on my own. It's wonderful. It's
Yeah.
one of those things, don't tell me. Oh yeah, I love it. But anyway, the bateau mouche is bateau mouche means the fly boat. Fly as in bzz, one of those.
Yeah.
But it's not called that because of its shape. It's called that because there was a Mr. Mouche who, believe it or not, this is true, who was the first man to build the boats to do the tourist trips on the Seine River.
Monsieur Mouche.
Mr. Mouche.
Now, talk
And
about
so
bad luck.
It was called Mr. Mouche and Company, and it was just like we call, Kleenex because it's a brand, but now we use it as a generic term. Well, it was a Mr. Mouche and Company that was the first company, and now it's just the term used for all of the boats.
No, that's a pretty good aside.
Isn't that a good one? I really like that one. Anyway.
See, I told you she told good stories.
I just want to add one thing, because everyone goes to the Eiffel Tower, And the last time I was there, it was a nasty day. It wasn't very nice weather, which, of course, is not the best day to go. If you have a choice when you are in Paris, obviously, make sure you go to the top on a day when you can see, because the visibility is what's really important. But I was with a few people, and I said, it's not the greatest weather, but if you want, we can walk across the bridge, which is right, because the Eiffel Tower is right next to the river, right next to the Seine. And there's a very nice bridge there. I said, why don't we walk across to the other side? Now, remember, when the Eiffel Tower was first built, it was for a World's Fair that was, in fact, on the other side of the Seine River. So this was the magnificent promenade entranceway to go across the river up to the World's Fair. And that area is called the Trocadero. And we'll talk about it in detail in another day. But when you go across the bridge, it's a 10, 15-minute walk, because you go across the bridge and you go up a series of steps. There's a little bit of a pond there. But what happens is you go up these very spectacular monumental stairs, and you go up the equivalent of about maybe 3 floors. And you get to this enormous esplanade. And from there, you have the most wonderful view of the Eiffel Tower, because it may even be higher than 3 floors up. It feels like it is. And you get a view of the Eiffel Tower and of the park with the grass that's underneath it and that goes into the background. And you get a whole vista. And you get it's a great thing to do. And a lot of people don't realize that. They just go to the Eiffel Tower. They look up from underneath, they go up to the top. But I would suggest that do that too, especially if you have a nice day or not nice day and you don't want to spend too much time on the top. And you have
because
a
the
little
higher
bit of
you
time.
go, the windier it's going to get.
The windier it's going to get.
It's, especially for someone like me who's not very comfortable at heights anymore. I used to be fine as a kid. I don't know what happens to people. We're brave when we're young, and then we
just get crazy and neurotic as we get older. I guess.
Anyway, I'm no exception, and so I don't want to be up there when it's super windy.
Right, and of course
it blows me over. It's not.
It's not. And of course, one of the things that makes it so remarkable is that it was included in the studies. We're talking 1887, 88, the stress of the wind, so it does, of course, move a little bit, but it's all worked into the plans for keeping, it's fine. But if you walk across the river, it's really beautiful. I mean, it's a great place to get a wonderful shot, day or night.
And it's probably pretty romantic. I haven't done it.
It's pretty romantic, yeah.
I've seen lots of pictures.
Yeah, and another day we'll talk about that area. It's an area that most people, if you ask people who've never been to Paris to name the things that they know and where they want to go, this is not one of them, because people don't necessarily know about it. But when I take people there, they go, wow,
Yeah.
So we should talk about that maybe sometime soon.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's really the story of the Eiffel Tower. So pretty soon we're going to have champagne up on top, and a glass-bottom boat that's actually the Eiffel Tower. And pretty soon there won't be any more line. And just another word, because if people go, whether they go in the morning, in the afternoon, or in the evening, just to know that aside for the moment until at least 2015, you either have this very fancy restaurant, or you just have little snack stands down below. And there are no restaurants nearby. It's not an area that has restaurants.
Yeah, it's catering trucks kind of
It's catering trucks, but they mostly have waffles, crepe, hot drinks, and
the typical French catering
ice cream,
trucks.
Maybe some packaged sandwiches.
Yeah, but not very good ones.
But there is grass nearby.
Yeah,
so you can bring a picnic.
That would be good, I think.
Lots of people,
I would enjoy that.
They do sit on the grass near there, and you can make a very nice half day or more out of a visit to the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, no, I think it would be very fun to do.
So there's our story about the Eiffel Tower.
Wonderful.
For today.
Thank you.
It's so much fun.
So before we wrap it up, I have to go back to something I mentioned a couple of shows ago, I think. We were talking about stores and credit cards. And I mentioned that I was going to try my American Capital One card, which does not have a chip, to see if I could use it to buy gas and to pay tolls, and I could not. I couldn't do that either in France or in Spain. I tried it there too. So in the meantime, I have a friend from America who's coming, and I warned him about this, and I told him, I don't know how you're going to because he's going to have a car. I told him, be careful with a car. You're going to have to gas up places where there's an attendant, and there's not that many attendants anymore at gas stations in France. It's mostly automatic.
Yeah, it's mostly automatic.
And same with the tolls. It's all automatic. And he said that his credit card, his new U.S. credit card, actually has a chip and a pin.
Uh-huh.
So that's pretty good. But then I heard from somebody else that these new American cards with chip and pins still don't work in Europe. But the man didn't specify if he meant France or if he tried it somewhere else. So I would like to hear from our listeners. If you have used a U.S. credit card with a chip and a pin, did it work? If you use it in France, did it work? It should. But, it's not the end of the world. You can just withdraw cash and pay with cash.
Right.
But you have to be prepared.
But let me just add something to that, because I have a credit card that's an American credit card that has a chip, and it does not have a pin. It just has a chip.
Oh.
And I went...
Oh, yeah. If you don't have a pin.
No, it does work, Annie. This is what you have. Yeah.
Oh.
This is the deal. You have... I know this because I had to go buy a bunch of metro tickets for a group.
Mm-hmm.
You use it. You put the card in. The machine's what we use when we put a card in and we punch in our PIN number.
Yeah.
But you don't use a PIN. You put the card in, and the computer will read it up, and then you just pull it out, and it gets signed.
And it works. Oh, well, that's good to know.
Yeah, and this, of course, was a Visa. So, I'm used to using mostly Visa and MasterCard. So
okay. Well, if we can hear from more listeners about this, that would be great, because it's, it's a detail, but it's,
I would suggest in any event that most people should have either a Visa or a MasterCard, because those are the two cards that are pretty much accepted absolutely everywhere.
Yeah, American Express not as much.
American Express not as much.
Places.
No.
Now that American Express has chip cards for France, anyway, I have a French American Express card with a chip and a pin, and so they're kind of trying to push into the market. Well, all right. So we're going to wrap it up.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Elyse.
You are quite welcome.
It has been lovely talking to you. Next week, I think we're talking about Reims and Épernay.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Reims and Épernay. I can't copy your accent when you say that in French. It drives me crazy. Yeah, because we talked about the history of Champagne, and it's time to talk about going there.
Visiting, yeah. So that's going to be the plan for next week. Thank you very much. And remember, listeners, the more reviews we get, the more visibility. So please go write us a review.
The more audibility.
That's right. But it is growing really,
it's really good.
Well, so it's really encouraging. We're going to keep doing this. We're not going anywhere. This is our 12th show. We're here for the duration.
We're here.
That's right. But we would
so much
love
to say.
To be a lot more visible. Thank you for your feedback, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you next week.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.